Everyone knows the fairy tale, a princess cursed to sleep, awaiting true love's kiss. But the real history behind this story is far more disturbing. The earliest Sleeping Beauty did not wake to a kiss. Her sleep began with a curse, and it ended in violence and with a cannibal queen. Why have centuries of storytellers buried these origins? And what does this darkness reveal about the legends we think we know? The answers begin in a medieval manuscript. In the early 14th century, long before the name Sleeping Beauty appeared in print, a sprawling French romance called Perceforest introduced a story that would echo through centuries. Composed between 1330 and 1344, Perceforest was no bedtime tale. It was a chivalric epic, weaving together pagan gods, knights, and the tangled destinies of royal families in a world that blurred myth and history. Within its more than 1 million words, the episode of Celandine and Troilus stands out as the oldest known ancestor of the Sleeping Beauty legend. Celandine, Princess of Zealand, is born into a courtly world obsessed with honor and fate. At her birth, 3 goddesses arrive: Lucina, Themis, and Venus, each bearing gifts. But a slight at the feast offends Themis. In response, she curses the infant. The first time Celandine touches Flax, she will fall into an enchanted sleep with no hope of waking. Venus, the goddess of love, softens the curse, promising that love will bring the princess back. Years pass before the curse takes hold. Celandine pricks her finger on a sliver of flax, collapses, and cannot be roused. The scene is steeped in the symbolism of courtly romance, her beauty preserved, her chamber sealed, her fate suspended. While later versions would use a spindle, here it is flax itself, a detail rooted in the practical, everyday dangers of medieval life. Troilus, a Scottish knight devoted to Celandine, learns of her sleep and is drawn to her by forces he cannot resist. Guided by Venus and aided by Zephyr, he enters the tower where Celandine lies. The narrative lingers on his hesitation, torn between reverence and desire, before he ultimately violates her in her sleep. The act is framed by the romance as both tragic and inevitable, a consequence of divine will and human frailty. Celandine's story, in its earliest form, is not about rescue, but about power, fate, and the uneasy boundaries of love and violence. The curse, the sleep, and the troubling awakening are all here, centuries before the fairy tale was softened for children. In 1634, Giambattista Basile published his Pentamerone, and with it a version of Sleeping Beauty that pushed the story's darkness to new extremes. Here, the princess is Thalia. Her fate is sealed by a splinter of flax that pierces her finger, sending her into a coma so deep that her father, believing her dead, locks her away in a remote country estate. Years pass. One day a king hunting nearby discovers the abandoned palace. He finds Thalia, still and beautiful, untouched by time. Overcome by desire, he rapes her while she remains unconscious. He leaves without a word, never knowing what he has set in motion. 9 months later, 2 children are born, twins, a boy and a girl, named Sun and Moon. Thalia does not wake for their birth. Instead, the infants nurse at her breast, and one searching for milk sucks the flax splinter from her finger. Only then does Talia open her eyes, bewildered to find herself a mother with no memory of how it happened. The king returns, learns of the twins, and claims them as his own. But his wife, the queen, discovers the truth. Driven by jealousy and rage, she orders the cook to kill sun and moon and serve them to the king as a meal. The cook, moved by pity, hides the children and substitutes lamb instead. The queen then plans to burn Talia alive, but the king intervenes, exposing his wife's crimes. The queen is executed, and Talia, the king, and their children are finally united. Basil's tale is unflinching in its brutality. Rape, unconscious motherhood, and attempted cannibalism are not hidden or softened. The story ends with a moral about fortune's blindness, but the horror lingers. This is the raw core that later authors would try to bury, a version of Sleeping Beauty far removed from the gentle fairy tale known today. In 1697, Charles Perrault published his version of Sleeping Beauty, La Belle au Bois Dormant, in Paris. Writing for the glittering court of Louis XIV, Perrault approached the tale with the sensibilities of Versailles in mind. The result was a story shaped as much by etiquette as by imagination. Gone was the violence that haunted earlier versions. Instead, Perrault offered a vision of restraint and decorum, carefully sidestepping the raw brutality of Basil's Italian predecessor. Perrault's narrative unfolds in two distinct parts. In the first, a princess is cursed by a slighted fairy to prick her finger on a spindle and fall into a century-long sleep. The entire court slumbers with her, the palace hidden behind a wall of thorns. When a prince finally arrives, he does not touch her. There is no kiss, no violation, no secret children. He simply waits as the spell lifts and the princess awakens naturally, as if from a long and peaceful dream. The prince's role is marked by patience and admiration, not conquest. The second part of Perrault's tale, less familiar to modern readers, introduces a new threat: the prince's mother, an ogress with a taste for human flesh. After the princess and prince marry in secret and have 2 children, the ogress plots to eat her grandchildren and daughter-in-law. Perrault retains the tension of Basil's cannibalistic queen, but strips away the horror of infanticide, substituting clever tricks and last-minute rescues for gruesome violence. The cook saves the children, the ogress is punished, and the family is reunited. Perrault's choices were deliberate. By omitting any hint of assault or coercion, and by framing the prince's actions as noble and restrained, he transformed a tale of fatalism and violation into one of virtue rewarded. The darkness remained, but it was filtered through the lens of courtly manners, designed to reassure and instruct an audience that prized decorum above all. In Perrault's hands, Sleeping Beauty became a story fit for salons and nurseries, a moral fable for a refined age. In 1812, the Brothers Grimm published their version of Sleeping Beauty, calling it Little Briar Rose. Unlike their French and Italian predecessors, Jacob and Wilhelm Grimm set out to collect stories they believed reflected true German folklore, though their sources often crossed borders. Their first edition replaced fairies with wise women, 13 of them, each invited to the princess's birth, each bearing gifts. But only 12 golden plates were available, so one wise woman was left out. Her anger becomes the source of the curse. At 15, the princess will prick her finger on a spindle and fall into a sleep that lasts 100 years. The spindle, a tool of everyday life, stands in for the more distant flax of earlier tales, pulling the story closer to the world of the Grimm's readers. The Grimm's version stops short of the violence and cannibalism that haunted Basile and Perrault. There are no secret children, no vengeful ogress. Instead, the story lingers on the dangers lurking outside the palace. As the princess sleeps, a thick hedge of thorns grows up around the castle. Over the years, countless princes try to force their way in, only to be trapped and killed by the thorns. The text does not spare the details. Bodies caught, impaled, and left to rot. Only after a full century does a new prince arrive, and the thorns part for him. He finds the princess and wakes her with a kiss, a detail that, while not present in Perrault's version, becomes iconic in the Grimm's hands. This kiss would echo through the centuries, finding its way into ballet, illustration, and most powerfully, into film. In 1959, Walt Disney Studios released its animated Sleeping Beauty, drawing heavily from the Grimm version but transforming it into a Technicolor romance. The film's famous kiss, set to Tchaikovsky's sweeping score, cements the image of true love's awakening. Yet the shadows of the original tales remain. Disney's Maleficent, modeled on the 13th Wise Woman, channels the anger and danger that early storytellers never fully erased. Scholars today still debate what the story means, whether it is a lesson about fate, a warning about desire, or a myth about power and peril lurking just beneath the surface. The Sleeping Beauty who wakes in cartoons and storybooks is a distant cousin of Celandine and Talia, her story shaped by centuries of retelling. But her origins are never fully forgotten. Our favorite fairy tales still shape childhoods and our collective values today. As we keep retelling these stories, we also decide what truths we are willing to face or erase. What we choose to remember says as much about us now as it does about the past. Share your thoughts below.